Audio Diary of Emma Foster, dated 19th of January 2025. I've stopped sleeping. When your nights are filled with whispers from across the multiverse, dreams become a distant luxury. Every evening, I sit by the quantum console in our lab, the one Ethan built with hands steady from genius and trembling with ambition. I stare at the blank interface, waiting for his voice, waiting for something, anything, to breach the silence. It's been 13 days since I heard from him, 13 days since he crossed over. Ethan always joked that the multiverse was like a vast ocean, each universe a drop in its infinite waters. But what he never admitted, what I suspect he'd barely whispered even to himself, was that he didn't know how to swim. Not really. And now, I'm here, stranded, with nothing but his last panicked transmissions to remind me how far he's drifted. The first messages were elated. "Emma, you wouldn't believe it. The sky here isn't blue, it's a kind of shimmering crimson. And the physics, Em, it's like the laws are rewritten with poetry instead of equations. I've never seen anything like it." He sounded like a child, breathless with discovery. I envied him then, just a little. I was the anchor, tethering him to home while he explored a universe of wonders. He sent images and descriptions of creatures unlike anything on Earth, sentient flora that pulsed with bioluminescence, spindly beings whose translucent forms shimmered as if made of liquid starlight. It was beautiful, he said, but there was an undercurrent to his words, a hesitance he tried to bury beneath his awe. "It's not all friendly here," he admitted on the third day. I've started calling them Umbra. They don't like me, Em. They know I'm not from here." That was the first time I felt it, the cold, creeping fear that would eventually seep into my bones. Ethan's messages grew shorter, punctuated by static and strained breaths. He once described a moment where his reflection in a pool of water moved independently of him, a subtle wave of its hand that left him questioning whether he was the intruder or if he was being studied in return. I remember the exact moment when I realized something was fundamentally wrong. It wasn't just his words, it was the way the quantum readings began to fluctuate wildly during his transmissions. The equipment would spark and hiss, displaying impossible values that defied every principle we thought we understood about parallel universe theory. "The mathematics here," he said on the 6th day, his voice trembling with a mixture of wonder and terror. "They're alive, Emma. The equations don't just describe reality, they shape it. I've watched numbers crawl across surfaces like insects, rearranging themselves into patterns that make my head hurt. Yesterday, I saw a theorem prove itself by evolving, like some kind of mathematical organism. I spent hours analyzing those transmissions, trying to make sense of the data patterns. The readings suggested that the barrier between our universes was becoming increasingly unstable. It was as if something was testing the boundaries, pressing against the membrane that separated our reality from theirs. By the 8th day, he was speaking in hurried whispers, his voice raw with exhaustion. "Emma, they're closer now. They watch me through the walls, but the walls aren't real. I think they're learning me, trying to understand what I am." "Come back," I begged him. "You've gone far enough. You've proved it works. You can come home." "I can't," he replied. "Not yet. There's more. If I can just figure out their pattern, I can—" Static swallowed the rest of his words, but I thought I heard something in the background, a low, resonant hum, like the sound of a massive swarm. The console sparked violently then, leaving a strange residue on its surface that seemed to shift and flow when I wasn't looking directly at it. I started keeping a log of the changes in our lab after that transmission. Small things at first, equipment measuring slightly different values than it should, shadows that seemed a fraction too dark, too solid. The air began to taste metallic, like ozone before a storm, but the storm never came. just that endless, waiting silence. I found his research notes from the weeks before the crossing. They were filled with increasingly frantic equations and diagrams, many crossed out or circled obsessively. In the margins, he'd written observations that made my blood run cold. Reality is thinner here, can feel other possibilities bleeding through. The mathematics don't contain the universe contains the mathematics. They're watching, always watching, learning. One page was nothing but the word wrong written over and over, each repetition slightly different, as if he'd been testing how many ways it could be written. The final entry, dated the day before he crossed, simply read, "The equations are hungry." On the 10th day, he sent his last transmission. They're inside now. They don't speak, but I can feel them. They've started showing me things, memories that aren't mine, lives I've never lived. I think they want me to understand them, but it's too much. I'm slipping, Emma. My thoughts, they're fracturing. There was a pause, and then, almost too softly to hear, "If I don't make it back, I'm sorry. For everything." And then silence. The silence wasn't empty, though. It hummed with potential, like a held breath before a scream. I started noticing things in the lab that shouldn't be possible. The shadows began to move when I wasn't watching, always just at the edge of my vision. Equipment would be slightly out of place, despite the security logs showing no one had entered. Once, I found a series of complex equations written on the whiteboard in what looked like Ethan's handwriting, but when I checked the security footage, the board remained blank. I've been analyzing the quantum signatures from his last transmission. They show something impossible, a sort of quantum entanglement that extends not just between particles, but between entire sections of space-time. It's as if reality itself is being rewoven, the fabric of our universe gradually aligning with whatever exists on the other side. The lab feels different now. The walls seem to pulse slightly, like a living thing breathing. Sometimes when I'm working late, I catch glimpses of impossible geometries in the corners of rooms, spaces that fold in on themselves in ways that shouldn't exist in 3 dimensions. The air itself feels thicker, more resistant, as if it's becoming something else entirely. Last night I found one of Ethan's old coffee mugs on my desk. It was still warm, steam rising from liquid that swirled with colors that shouldn't exist. When I touched it, the surface rippled like mercury, and for a moment, I saw my reflection split into countless versions of myself, each one slightly different, each one reaching back toward me with desperate eyes. I've started documenting the changes in my own perception. My dreams, when I manage to sleep, are filled with mathematical symbols that twist and writhe like living things. I wake up with equations burned into my mind, solutions to problems we haven't even conceived of yet. But they're wrong somehow, not just incorrect, but fundamentally hostile to our reality. The quantum console has begun to change, too. The sleek metal surface has developed patterns that remind me of frost on a window, except they move and shift when you look at them directly. The readings it gives are increasingly bizarre, showing multiple contradictory values simultaneously, as if it's measuring several realities at once. Yesterday, I found something new on the console, a single line of text, burned into the interface as if by some unseen hand. "Don't follow me." I don't know if it's a warning or a plea, maybe both. But the thought of never seeing him again, it's unbearable. I've been preparing the equipment for my own crossing. The calculations are almost complete. Just one more adjustment, and I'll be ready. The equations I'm using aren't like anything we developed together. They came to me in fragments, appearing in my mind like memories I never had. They're beautiful in their complexity, but there's something wrong about them. Something that makes my eyes water and my head spin when I look at them too long. They remind me of the patterns I've started seeing in the shadows, the ones that seem to watch me when I work. I've started talking to the shadows. Sometimes I think they answer. Tonight, As I adjusted the console for the final time, I noticed something, a faint distortion in the air, like ripples on the surface of a pond. I reached out, but the air burned cold against my fingertips. It felt alive, almost, as if the fabric of reality itself was rejecting me. I pulled my hand back, heart pounding, and double-checked the numbers. Everything was correct. And yet, the feeling lingered. The monitors show readings that shouldn't be possible. The quantum field measurements are off the charts, showing patterns that remind me of brainwaves, as if the universe itself is thinking, dreaming, becoming aware. The air is thick with possibility, each breath drawing in not just oxygen, but potential futures, alternate presents, parallel pasts. I understand now why Ethan couldn't resist crossing over. The pull is impossible to ignore, like gravity, but emotional, intellectual, spiritual. It promises knowledge beyond human comprehension, experiences that would reshape our understanding of existence itself. But I also understand what he meant about fracturing. Reality isn't meant to be seen from the outside. We're not meant to know how deep the waters go. But tonight, as I sat by the console, I heard something. Not Ethan, but something else. A low, resonant hum, faint but unmistakable. It's the sound I heard in his final message, the sound that has haunted my dreams. And for the first time, I'm truly afraid. The shadows are moving faster now, more purposefully. They've started forming patterns that remind me of the equations in Ethan's notes, but they're solving themselves, evolving, becoming something new, something hungry. The air tastes like metal and possibility, and I can feel the weight of countless universes pressing against the thin membrane of our reality. What if I'm not ready? What if I go and there's no way back? What if the Umbra are waiting for me too? What if they've already crossed over into my world? The hum is growing louder now. It's inside the lab, vibrating through the walls, the floor, my very bones. I've sealed the door, but it won't hold. Whatever it is, it's coming for me. The shadows on the wall, they're moving, shifting, like smoke trapped under glass. I'm starting to see shapes within them, shapes that remind me of the creatures Ethan described, but warped, elongated, wrong. The equations on my screens are changing by themselves now, evolving into forms that hurt to look at. They're beautiful, though, like watching evolution happen in real time, like seeing the birth of new mathematics, new physics, new realities. I understand why Ethan couldn't look away. I understand why he had to know more. The console is showing impossible readings, quantum states that exist and don't exist simultaneously, probability curves that loop back on themselves like Mobius strips, wave functions that suggest the entire lab exists in multiple states at once. The barriers between universes are wearing thin. I can feel other realities bleeding through, taste them in the air like static before a storm. I can't stay here. I have to go. Maybe I can find Ethan. Maybe I can bring him back. Or maybe I'll disappear just like him, swallowed by a universe that was never meant for us. But I have to try. The mathematics demand it. The shadows insist upon it. Reality itself is bending toward this moment, this decision. The console is ready. The portal is opening. I can feel the pull of it, like a tide dragging me toward its depths. It's almost beautiful, shimmering light cascading in waves, beckoning me forward. My heart races as I take a step closer, the hum now a deafening roar. The air around me is fracturing, splitting into prismatic shards that show glimpses of other places, other times, other possibilities. I see myself reflected infinitely, each version making a slightly different choice, each one leading to a different outcome. Some are screaming, some are smiling. All of them are reaching towards something just out of sight. If anyone finds this, tell him I tried. Tell him I never stopped loving him. Tell him, I understand. The equations aren't just hungry, they're alive. and we're all just variables in a calculation too vast to comprehend. The hum is deafening now. It's time. I step forward, into the mathematics, into the darkness, into the infinite possibilities of the multiverse. The last thing I see is my reflection in the console screen, but it's not moving with me anymore. It's watching, waiting, learning. Like the Umbra. End of diary.